The moment I stepped off the shuttle, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The planet Zyphora wasn't just alien, it was absurd. Gravity shifted like it had mood swings, the streets were a tangle of floating platforms and glowing walkways, and everywhere I looked, creatures with 6, 8, sometimes even 10 limbs were strutting around like it was the most normal thing in the universe. The first time I tripped over a tentacle that had been sticking out of the wall for some reason, it wrapped itself around my ankle, giving me a yelp that might have offended at least half of the local population. Worse, some of the tentacles had suction pads and were sticky. Sticky in a way that made my shoes scream for mercy. And then there were the women. Oh, the women. Multilimbed, glowing in colors I didn't have names for, with eyes that rotated independently to watch me like I was a particularly entertaining science experiment. They laughed at my clumsy attempts to bow, their voices like a chorus of chimes that sent shivers down my spine, and not all of them entirely unpleasant ones. I tried to wave politely, which resulted in an unintentional slap to a nearby 8-armed aristocrat's backside. Her giggle was equal parts amused and scandalized, and I had no idea how to recover. I ended up apologizing by bowing so low I nearly kissed the ground. They seemed delighted. Somehow, that was the right response. A booming voice announced my presence. Or maybe it was the Queen. Or both. Who could tell? My translator implant was working, mostly, and I gathered that I was not here merely as a visitor but as a candidate for some sort of ritual called the Virility Talent Show. Apparently, all visiting males were required to prove they were sufficiently virile to remain on Zyphora. Fail, and the penalty wasn't imprisonment or fines, it was exile. Or worse, becoming a permanent exhibit in the Museum of Failed Humans. I swallowed hard, imagining a display of me, preserved in a clear pod, flailing endlessly while alien children poked me with curiosity. The rules were ridiculous. I had to lift a giant ovum the size of a small car without cracking it, dance seductively with 8 arms while the entire audience watched, and cook a meal that would make the Queen swoon. Each of these sounded terrifying in its own right, but combined with my general clumsiness and unfamiliarity with alien customs, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The ovum itself squirmed as if it had a mind, coated in some slimy iridescent substance, and I had no idea how to lift it without slipping and ending up smeared across the arena floor. The dance? I couldn't even move rhythmically on Earth without looking like a seizure victim. 8 arms? I have 2. And cooking, well, I could make cereal. That counted, right? I spent the first hour wandering the alien streets, trying to acclimate. I tripped over floating benches, nearly collided with a floating carriage piloted by a purple-skinned being with 6 heads, and accidentally knocked over a fruit stand filled with bouncing orbs that squeaked when crushed. Every time I apologized, the women around me either laughed or clapped, sometimes both. I wasn't sure if I was offending them or impressing them, and frankly, the line between the two seemed thinner than my dignity at that point. One particularly audacious woman approached, her 4 arms elegantly draped as if I was some kind of amusing pet. She leaned close and whispered in a voice like tinkling bells, "Your clumsiness, it is appealing." I nearly choked on my own tongue. Training for the talent show was worse than I imagined. The ovum practice dummy I was handed slipped out of my arms so many times that the aliens stopped counting crashes and just started laughing hysterically at my desperate attempts. I attempted to dance with a series of mechanical arms attached to a harness, only to become entangled like a marionette in the hands of a sadistic puppeteer. One particularly ambitious attempt resulted in me spinning into a vat of luminescent slime, which somehow made me look more virile in their eyes. The women around me cheered, calling my erratic movements bold and passionately chaotic. Cooking lessons were equally humiliating. The ingredients were alive, moving on their own, and one of them sprayed acid when provoked. I tried to chop a moving vegetable and ended up launching it across the room, where it landed in the lap of a dignified 6-armed official. She screamed in a mix of surprise and delight, and the Queen, observing from above, laughed so hard that the balcony shook. Somehow, I was winning points, not for skill, but for sheer audacity. I was fumbling, failing, slipping, burning, and somehow surviving every disaster with my life intact, and the aliens found it irresistible. As the sun, or whatever it was that passed for a sun here, began to set in hues of impossible colors, I realized something. The absurdity of it all, the chaotic energy, the flirtatious glances, and the laughter from the alien women, it was intoxicating. I might be a human in over my head, completely unprepared for this alien culture, but my mistakes were becoming my charm. Virility, apparently, was not about strength or perfection. It was about courage, humor, and the ability to tumble headfirst into chaos while still standing at the end. I looked around at the gathering crowd, at the women who watched with gleeful anticipation, and for the first time felt something dangerous: excitement. Not just survival excitement, but that peculiar, dizzying kind of human excitement called attraction. I had no idea how I would lift the ovum, dance with 8 arms, or cook a dish worthy of a queen. But one thing was certain: if virility meant surviving this carnival of absurdity while keeping my dignity mostly intact, then I was ready to fail spectacularly, and somehow, miraculously, succeed. The talent show began with a fanfare of blaring alien horns that rattled my teeth and caused the floating platforms to wobble unpredictably beneath my feet. I had been told to lift the giant ovum first. I approached it cautiously, hands outstretched, staring at its slick, iridescent surface. It wobbled and pulsed in a way that made it seem alive, or at least sentient enough to be judging me. I tried to lift it. I really did. And then it slipped straight through my fingers. It bounced once, twice, and then sailed across the arena, crashing into a statue of some alien hero I assumed was important. The crowd gasped, the women screeched, and a few dignitaries fainted. I froze, hoping my death stare would make the ovum think twice about breaking anything else. Surprisingly, it didn't, but the applause that erupted confused me. Apparently, turning catastrophe into entertainment was the first lesson of Zephyrin virility. Next came the dance. I was expected to dance seductively with 8 arms. I have 2. I glanced at the 8 mechanical appendages strapped to me and immediately regretted every life choice that had led to this moment. I began to move, slowly at first, trying to synchronize my 2 arms with the others. Then, panic set in. I flailed. The arms flailed. I collided with my own limbs in a way that should have been catastrophic. I spun in circles, tripped over a floating platform, and somehow ended up in an accidental pirouette that sent me sliding backward into a vat of glowing fluid. The crowd erupted in laughter, a few alien women clapping wildly. Somehow, my human ineptitude was interpreted as bold artistry. I took a bow, slick with alien goo, feeling simultaneously heroic and mortified. Cooking was next. I had hoped, prayed even, that this would be easier. It wasn't. The kitchen was a chaos of sentient ingredients, bouncing pods that hissed when touched, noodles that slithered like snakes, and sauces that glowed and exploded at the slightest provocation. I attempted to dice a moving vegetable and somehow sent it flying into the lap of a 4-armed judge. She shrieked, spat out a tiny fireball, and then laughed. I panicked, tossed more ingredients together, and somehow created what could only be described as a disaster salad, complete with flaming garnish. The queen sampled it with a skeptical look, paused, and then laughed so hard that a chandelier shook precariously. My heart leapt. I had survived cooking Zephyrin style, and apparently, human improvisation counted as virility. Throughout the competitions, the romantic tension was palpable. The alien women circled me like predatory but playful cats, their glances and gestures teasing me relentlessly. One particularly daring woman, her 4 arms folded delicately yet provocatively across her chest, winked and whispered something that made my translator stutter. I had no idea what she said, but I blushed anyway. My awkwardness seemed to charm them more than skill ever could. Every slip, spill, and flail was met with giggles and flirty applause. My human fumbling was not a curse. It was an exotic form of entertainment, and apparently, highly attractive. The ovum challenge had one final twist. The announcer's booming voice instructed that I must now lift it while simultaneously maintaining eye contact with the audience and performing a flirtatious grin. I tried. I really, desperately tried. My arms shook, my legs buckled, and the ovum wobbled dangerously. It slipped again, barely saved by an accidental kick that sent it rolling along the arena like some kind of absurd, iridescent bowling ball. The alien women squealed with delight, calling the maneuver audacious and wildly virile. I wanted to crawl under the platform and die, but apparently, this counted as a spectacular display of courage. During the dance portion, the mechanical arms had become uncooperative. They twitched, curled, and occasionally grabbed random objects, including me. I found myself being swung around in ways that defied physics and sanity, narrowly avoiding collisions with the audience. Somehow, this chaotic display was interpreted as a sensual, daring performance. My flailing was eroticized. I had never felt so simultaneously embarrassed and desirable. Every misstep was now an act of human bravado, and every slip brought laughter, applause, and flirtatious glances from the alien spectators. Cooking for the Queen turned into a full-scale catastrophe comedy. One ingredient sprouted legs and ran across the counter, another sprayed acid that narrowly missed my eyebrows, and the final garnish somehow ignited spontaneously. I caught a wisp of flame on my sleeve, panicked, and tossed it into a pot. The result was a steaming, smoking, aromatic disaster that would have been unpalatable on Earth. The Queen tasted it, paused, looked me straight in the eye, and then burst out laughing. "Bold," she said. "Vivacious. Unpredictable. Human virility at its finest." I blinked. Somehow, being completely inept had worked in my favor again. By the end of the day, I was a mess, slime-coated, slightly burned, and entirely bewildered. Yet the alien women seemed to adore me. Their eyes followed my every move, giggles and whispers floating through the arena. They saw courage where I saw chaos, charm where I saw embarrassment, and virility where I saw disaster. My human awkwardness had become my superpower. Every misstep, flop, and culinary disaster had elevated me from hapless visitor to celebrated oddity. For the first time, I began to feel something I hadn't expected: anticipation. Not just fear of failure, but excitement at the absurd, erotic, and chaotic journey ahead. I had no idea how I would survive the next round, let alone continue impressing these incomprehensibly alluring alien women. But if the first day was any indication, virility on Zyphora wasn't about perfection, it was about audacity, resilience, and the ability to stumble through absurdity with a grin. And apparently I had that in spades, whether I liked it or not. By the time the third day of the talent show rolled around, I was beginning to understand Zyphora's peculiar logic. The more I failed, the more impressive I became. Somehow, my constant mishaps had earned me a reputation not just as a competitor, but as a human marvel. Alien women whispered behind their hands, eyes glittering with amusement and something dangerously close to desire. Every flub I made, tripping over floating platforms, slipping on sentient fruit, burning ingredients with wild abandon, was now seen as daring, unpredictable, and intensely attractive. I was the accidental hero of chaos, and the audience adored me for it. My primary confidant? Temptress? Guide? It was hard to define. Was Zyra, a dazzling 8-armed dancer with skin that shimmered between violet and magenta depending on her mood. She approached me one morning with a mischievous grin and 4 of her arms elegantly draped across her chest, the other 4 gesturing wildly as if conducting an orchestra only she could hear. She leaned close, and I caught a whiff of her pheromones, a dizzying mix of something floral and something that made my stomach flip. "You are remarkably entertaining," she whispered. "I cannot wait to see what calamity you will create next." I could only nod, tongue-tied, wondering how humans had ever survived without alien pheromones to complicate everything. The next challenge was introduced with a fanfare that rattled my teeth and sent a nearby gravity platform spinning dangerously. It was called the Grand Virility Trial, and it was every previous challenge rolled into one: lift a smaller ovum, dance seductively with 8 arms, and prepare a dish that could impress the Queen, all simultaneously. My stomach lurched at the thought. I had survived each individually through luck and improvisation, but the combination promised certain doom. I reminded myself to breathe, to think, and mostly, to avoid screaming. The trial began with the ovum. My fingers gripped its slippery surface, and immediately it squirmed like a living thing. I lifted it awkwardly, wobbling, and somehow managed to keep it aloft for approximately 3 seconds before it slipped, bounced off my shoulder, and rolled toward a group of alien dignitaries. I lunged, tripped, and accidentally sent the ovum spinning into the air, where it landed perfectly balanced on my head. Gasps and laughter echoed through the arena. Zyra clapped, clearly impressed by my accidental dexterity. I had no idea whether to feel proud or horrified. Then came the dance. My mechanical arms had been adjusted, but somehow they were even less cooperative than before. They twitched, curled, and occasionally slapped me across the face. I spun, flailed, and collided with the audience platform, narrowly missing a small child with 6 eyes. The women around me cheered, their eyes sparkling with a mix of amusement and desire. Every misstep became part of the choreography, every stumble a bold move. I had no control over my body, yet somehow, in this chaotic human way, I had captivated them. Cooking was the final, terrifying component. Ingredients wriggled, glowed, and occasionally tried to escape the kitchen. I grabbed a moving vegetable, flung it into a pot, and accidentally set it on fire. The flames shot upward, singeing a decorative banner, and I panicked, tossing alien spices like confetti. The aroma was nauseating but undeniably potent. The queen, hovering above the chaos, tasted the resulting dish, paused, and then laughed until tears streamed down her face. She declared it bold, passionate, and undeniably human. I blinked. Somehow, my chaotic improvisation had achieved culinary brilliance, or at least comedic brilliance. Throughout the trial, the romantic tension simmered like a volatile potion. Zyra danced around me, sometimes helping, sometimes teasing, and occasionally pinching my behind when she thought no one was watching. Her attention was intoxicating, her flirtation both challenging and exhilarating. Other alien women joined in, fluttering, circling, and whispering, making my human brain short-circuit in all sorts of pleasurable ways. Every gesture, every glance, every accidental brush of tentacle against human skin was amplified, interpreted as a mix of daring, charm, and virility. By the end of the grand virility trial, I was a mess, covered in slime, singed in several places, and holding the ovum on my head like a ceremonial crown. The audience erupted in cheers, whistles, and flirty applause. The judges, alien and human translators alike, were laughing, clapping, and taking notes that I was certain would go down in history as the most bizarre human performance ever recorded. I was victorious, not through skill, strength, or preparation, but through chaos, adaptability, and my human ability to survive disaster with a grin. In a quiet moment after the chaos, Zyra approached me again. 4 arms draped over my shoulders, 2 teasingly tugging at my shirt, and the other 2 gesturing as if she were presenting me as a trophy. "You are remarkable," she whispered, voice low and teasing. "Bold. Chaotic. Irresistible. I am intrigued." I could barely form words, stumbling over my tongue, but I managed a weak nod. My heart raced, my stomach fluttered, and somewhere deep in my human core, I realized that this absurd talent show had evolved into something much more dangerous: real desire. The alien women's laughter and flirtation followed me everywhere, creating a dizzying, erotic chaos that left me exhilarated and terrified. I had survived every challenge, gained the attention and admiration of dozens of multi-limbed, stunningly attractive aliens, and somehow proven my virility in ways I could never have imagined. Virility, it turned out, was not measured in strength or grace, but in courage, humor, and the ability to tumble through chaos while still standing. And if Zyra's teasing eyes were any indication, I was only just beginning to understand what it meant to be truly desirable on Zyphora. The announcement came with a fanfare of horns and flashing lights that nearly dislodged my last shred of dignity. I had survived the grand virility trial, a feat that even the aliens themselves admitted had been unprecedented. I stood there, covered in slime, singed in multiple places, holding the ovum like a crown, while a crowd of multi-limbed women cheered, clapped, and flitted around me like excited, exotic butterflies. My human brain struggled to process the adoration, the laughter, and the unmistakable erotic tension that hung thick in the air. Somehow, I had not only survived, I had triumphed, and in a style that could only be described as spectacularly ridiculous. Zaira was the first to approach, her 8 arms moving with a grace that made me feel clumsy even standing still. 4 draped over my shoulders, 2 tugged playfully at my sleeves, and the last 2 made little gestures I couldn't interpret but assumed were complimentary. "You have done it," she purred, voice low and musical. "Bold. Chaotic. Irresistible. I wish to explore what other chaos you might offer me." I could only nod, tongue-tied and flustered, all trying not to trip over the floating platform beneath my feet. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, and something far more dangerous, a human concept I had only recently begun to grasp: desire. Other alien women surrounded me, giggling and whispering, teasing me relentlessly. One brushed her tentacle across my chest, making me flinch and blush simultaneously. Another draped herself over my arm, whispering in a language that sounded like wind chimes, clearly amused by my flustered attempts at response. I had become a magnet for affection, attention, and flirtation, all of it chaotic, erotic, and overwhelmingly human. Somehow, my ineptitude had become my allure. Every stumble, misstep, and accidental display of virility had elevated me to a level of desirability I could never have imagined. The queen herself descended from her balcony, a vision of majesty and amusement. She was adorned in layers of shimmering fabric, every limb performing a delicate dance that somehow conveyed authority, humor, and flirtation all at once. She approached me with measured steps, each one punctuated by the soft hum of her ceremonial jewelry. "Human," she said, her voice carrying across the arena. "You have survived the impossible, flouted chaos with grace, and proven your virility in ways even I could not have predicted. You are accepted. Welcome to Zyphora." I blinked stunned. My jaw opened, then closed, then opened again. Somehow, I had not just survived, I had earned a place here, and the knowledge left my head spinning in delight, terror, and dizzying excitement. As the celebration continued, I was pulled into an impromptu dance with Zaira. Her 8 arms entwined with my 2, guiding me through movements that defied both gravity and sense. I stumbled, fell, and spun in ways that would have been mortifying on Earth, yet here, they were celebrated, cheered, and even considered erotic. Laughter echoed around the arena as I accidentally toppled the floating platform, nearly smacking another alien woman in the process. But she laughed, and teased me for the audacity. Every misstep was a victory, every stumble a testament to human charm, and every accidental brush of tentacle against skin a spark of attraction I could barely comprehend. Dinner followed, a feast in my honor. I attempted to sit, misjudged the low gravity, and nearly floated into the ceiling. Zaira caught me with a laugh, pulling me back down with a teasing glance. The food was exotic, alive, and occasionally mischievous, bouncing off plates and squeaking when touched. I flailed, flopped, and somehow managed to consume a reasonable amount without causing mass chaos. Each successful bite was met with claps and giggles. My human awkwardness had become not just acceptable but celebrated. I realized, with a mixture of pride and disbelief, that my charm lay in my very inability to be perfect. By the time the festivities wound down, I was exhausted, sticky, slightly singed, and more exhilarated than I had ever been in my life. Zaira led me to a quieter area, where the stars, or whatever alien version of stars shone above, glimmered in impossible colors. She leaned close, 8 arms moving fluidly around me in a display of intimate playfulness. "You are remarkable," she whispered. "Bold, human, chaotic, and somehow, irresistibly virile. I wish to explore what else you might do." I could only nod, my mind spinning, heart racing, and body responding in ways that were entirely human and entirely ridiculous in this alien context. As the night drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had arrived terrified, bewildered, and utterly unprepared for the alien customs of Zyphora. I had flubbed every challenge, tripped over everything, set things on fire, and somehow survived the most ridiculous virility trials imaginable. Yet through it all, I had gained admiration, laughter, affection, and desire from beings far more complex, alluring, and chaotic than anything I had ever encountered on Earth. I had proven, in the most absurd and humiliating ways possible, that human virility was not about perfection, strength, or skill. It was about courage, humor, adaptability, and the willingness to stumble through chaos with a grin. And now, as Zyra's arms wrapped around me, guiding me through a playful dance beneath the impossible sky, I realized that I had not only survived Zyphora's trials, I had found something far more intoxicating: romance, excitement, and the chaotic thrill of being desired by a world entirely alien, yet endlessly captivating. I had become a hero, a lover, a human marvel in a place where chaos ruled, laughter reigned, and virility was measured not by might but by the audacity to embrace life and desire, with both arms flailing wildly. And somehow, that was enough.